Thanks a lot, Grant. I think we're only about a year into really an exciting time in the industry, which is mobile broadband. LTE coverage is fairly limited right now. We have 10 megabits of speeds. 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we're going to be up to 30, 40 megabit speeds, and coverage is going to be fairly ubiquitous at that point. So we have a great panel here. Maybe I'll just have everyone introduce themselves first and a little bit about their background. Mark?
Thank you. Mark Lipford. I'm the Director of Global Standards Ecosystem Development for Sprint. Been working in the communications industry since the late 80s, various parts of the industry. I've worked everywhere from being a technician on the ground to now in the global standards and the ecosystem. My team represents us in the industry and developing these technologies we're going to be discussing.
Doctor?
John Mattison. I'm with Kaiser Permanente. I started off as an evolutionary biologist and then went to medical school and practiced critical care, trauma medicine, started a hyperbaric medicine program, and did a lot of preventive medicine. I was then drafted and described myself as an accidental informaticist at Kaiser Permanente, where I led the largest electronic health record deployment in the country. I co-chair our data center strategy. I'm the sponsor of our big data predictive analytics project within the organization. And I'm the founder of the international standard for XML in the exchange of health records. Filed various patents around the use of avatars in healthcare, and really focused on driving health and wellness through engaging the consumer and using modern technology to restore the ancient wisdom of mindfulness and how we need to make decisions on a daily basis that really influence our health.
Jonathan?
Good morning, all. It's Jonathan King. I'm Vice President of Cloud Strategy and Business Development with CenturyLink. I have had the privilege of oscillating between small companies and big companies over my career, and currently with CenturyLink. Prior to CenturyLink, I was with a company called Joyent, which is a cloud company based in San Francisco, and prior to that, I spent 5 years with Verizon, leading an outsourcing practice there. And prior to that, various jobs, and like my colleague to my right, I started out in a different field. I started out in law, and have recently picked up my legal studies with an emphasis on privacy law and data protection, and published a Stanford Law Review article last year and a Wake Forest Law Review article this year on big data and privacy, which we'll be talking about in a panel after this one.
Great. And I think, Mark, you're going to be on the panel later also?
Yes, I'll be on one of the 5G panels.
And Dr. will not be on a panel, so
I'm going to be joining his.
I've drafted him on my panel while we've been sitting here. So.
Perfect. That is absolutely perfect. So, Jonathan, maybe we can start out with you. Where do you think the big opportunities for growth are? And I think you're very focused on the cloud now. Can you talk about some of the challenges there and where the big revenue opportunities are?
Sure. So I think from a cloud computing standpoint, we're excited about recent moves that we've made. And growth in the industry overall. If you look at the most recent Gartner Magic Quadrant, which there's a public report out now, Amazon is up and to the right. Microsoft is trying to trail, and you see Google up on that quadrant now. And a year ago, Amazon was there, but Microsoft and Google weren't, right? So you can start to see a phenomenon of over-the-top arrival, if not dominance, right out of the gates in cloud computing. And we've been making investments, and just given our hyper-focus on IT services and cloud, we're very much in that game, and we're excited about where we're headed. But if you look at the rest of the quadrant, it's folks like IBM, CSC, Verizon is there. Outside of that, though, you start to see, a trailing of, other carriers with, market competitive cloud offerings, and I think that's something for the industry to look at and think about. I think from a beyond cloud, we'll talk about big data today. I think stepping back, if you look at the 90s and early 2000, it was the internet, it was the network. And then you look at Amazon launching AWS and exploding, 2006 through, present time, and others coming along with computing. Well, there you had compute. And what's next is data. And a lot of what the Internet of Things is all about data. It's, this next act is different, though, than all the rest, because data has a lot more complexity around it. And we've seen that with things like, the leaks last year and all of the re-emphasis on data sovereignty. And you're just in this different realm, I think, with data that's almost hard to get your mind around. That you have new business models, but you have new things that are possible. Therefore, you have really technology in some ways moving faster than the law. And I think that's an area where this industry in particular, because the network connects it all, can really apply a lot of leadership, and I'm excited to be part of that discussion.
Well, I think historically with new technologies, it takes 10 years or more to really understand what the new applications are that people can really utilize and develop those applications. And I know, Doctor, you're very, very focused on how do we kind of take advantage of the new technologies. Can you talk about some of the cool new applications you see out there?
Sure. First thing I'd like to add on to what Jonathan was saying is that while the pace of technology in Moore's Law is outstripping policy and law, it's even to a greater extent being outstripped by the growth of knowledge in healthcare. So if you look at what we're learning today in genomics and proteomics and the exposome, those things in the environment that we interact with, and the socialome and social exhaust, and how all of these different data sets are converging and being linked to really begin to characterize the human experience. You add to that microbiomics, which is really unknown to most communities, but there are 10 times more bacteria in our gut than there are cells in our body. There's 100 times more genes in our gut than our body, and about 40% of what circulates in our blood is directly driven by the ecosystem of bacteria in our gut. And we're learning now that there are almost 100 diseases with a very, very significant fingerprint of what's in our gut. So when you look at the 3.2 billion base pairs of the human genome, and you look at the interaction of that with the entire ecosystem of the microbiome that's in our gut, on our skin, and the impact it has on our health, the rate of new knowledge generation in healthcare and the rate of our ability to begin applying that information is growing at super Moore's Law pace. And so knowledge is outstripping Moore's Law, which is outstripping our capacity to manage it with policy and law. So one of the fascinating things is that my organization was started over 60 years ago on the vision of preventive health. And only now in the era of Obamacare is preventive health getting its due focus in terms of not treating sickness, but creating more wellness and preventing people from getting in the hospital in the first place. And one of my skin diving buddies, Marty Cooper, who invented the cell phone, upon making his very first phone call, realized that the implications for healthcare of wireless cell phones was going to be profound at that time. So my vision is that pervasive, high bandwidth associated with tools to guide our daily decisions that drive how we exercise, how we eat, how we interact socially, how we actually manage our health through mindfulness is going to be significantly influenced by three-dimensional avatars. And these avatars are going to be supporting us in ways, and if you look at what's going on in robotics today and how we're beginning to understand the primitives of facial expression and how different facial expressions and tones of voice shape our behavior, and the opportunity, as I see it, is to be able to apply all of these new technologies in ways that support us becoming more mindful and living healthier lives so that we prevent disease rather than get more and more sophisticated at treating disease when it's already too late. So if you think about the network implications of three-dimensional avatars that are using very humanoid features to help motivate us to do the things that we choose to do for ourselves to improve our health through diet and exercise and sleep and social relationships. The demands we've barely scratched the surface of demand, and these avatars, I believe, are not going to be just applied to health, they're going to be applied to every aspect of our lives. So get ready, we've barely seen the demand begin to impact the network capacity.
And is your company running any avatars now or websites that we can go look?
We actually have, we have lots of mobile apps that we're using for all kinds of different conditions. We have a digital strategy for how to create an ecosystem. It's what I call a behavioral symphony for wellness. So the current epidemic of diabetes and obesity and all the associated comorbidities of heart disease, stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's are directly related to lifestyle decisions. And so we're very, very focused on creating applications that help us choose healthier behaviors to prevent those diseases in the first place. Your question about avatars, we have one project that's very early but very successful already. Those folks who are so overweight that they can't exercise to lose the weight and they need to have bariatric surgery, one of the criteria to make sure that they are emotionally and psychologically prepared for the surgery is to get them just to lose 10% of their weight before they go under the knife. And so we're using avatars that resemble them in their post-surgical state to help motivate them in order to lose that first 10% so that they're on the path to recovery before they actually have the surgery. And then they have a much higher, much better prognosis of actually taking the weight off and keeping the weight off long term as a result of using the avatars to motivate them pre, during, and post their surgical procedure.
Mark, could you maybe talk about some other areas of applications or growth that you kind of see, and maybe you can touch on some of the devices that you can kind of see that support all this?
Right. I mean, and earlier today I was asked, what keeps me awake at night? These applications are what keeps me awake at night, is how do we build a network and how do we get the devices to support this? I mean, because we do see the next generation is going to be not about a new technology as much as it is about a lifestyle. How do the consumers interact and use the technology and the capability? So how do we focus on capacity, the spectrum, and density to support not one person doing this, but hundreds of millions? And so we've got to look at ways of making sure that you have the bandwidth and the capabilities to support the high bandwidth demands of not just the health industry, but even the way I interact with my family. Families today are more and more dispersed across the country or the globe, and what's that interaction like, and the communications and your lifestyle. It's building a network or networks and having them mesh together so that you can meet these demands.
So one of my pet peeves is I can't get through the day on this phone with the battery. I know there's a lot of new chips coming out this year and new technologies that are going to improve battery life. Do you think that'll still be a problem a year or two from now?
I mean, I think history has shown that no matter how well you improve something, there's going to be higher demands. It's going to be a constant struggle. Obviously, as you improve the devices and the performance, battery or how do you power the unit is always something that needs to be considered and continued investment in and activity. So I think while it may improve, it will always be one of the issues that we have to deal with.
Are there any new devices, wearables or tablets or anything else that you're particularly excited about that people aren't focused on?
I think just all of it. I mean, I think the wearables is the newest thing out there, and how will they be adopted by the consumers? How will they be used? How will they change? I mean, I don't see us all running around like Dick Tracy talking into our wrists, but I think having it as it monitors your health and interacts with you and using those devices is, I think they're going to continue to evolve.
So Jonathan, it might not be your area of focus, but one of my pet peeves is I still kind of need my laptop with me, even though I have a tablet and an iPhone with me. Or am I going to get to a point where I can really have a true PC-type capability in the cloud that I can access off a very thin device with a simple keyboard? Or
yeah, well, I mean, I think there's lots of work going on and continuing in VDI and VDI work in the cloud, right? But I think more broadly, in listening to John, it reminds me I was in a conference in 2008, and I was listening to a futurist talk about how holographs were going to be in our glasses, and I was like, oh yeah, that's going to happen. And I think there's all sorts of work going on now in making holographs project down and keyboards. So I think there's like orders of magnitude, there's step function change that's coming where you can say, well, am I going to have to carry my laptop with me? Well, what if you had a stand where you put your phone up and it projected your keyboard and a screen and that's your laptop? I mean, it's sort of, that's a future. It's not on the near-term horizon. But
Although that technology is available now.
right. I mean, that's my point, is that this stuff happens. We're in this, you know, there's those, you know, if you read The Singularity and go the Kurzweil route, we're in a law of accelerating return right now, not just Moore's law, but all these laws. And I think, you know, just look at, I mean, I'm wearing my Nike smartwatch, which had like a month shelf life, and then it ended, I guess, apparently, which I didn't get that memo, because I bought it, and then it ended like the next day, but I still wear it. It does serve the purpose of fuel, right? So I'm wearing it, and I connect this over Bluetooth, you know, and you know, we're coming up on a wrap, but there's how fast this stuff goes out. I look around, and all my friends are wearing these wrist things. I'm like, oh, you know, so I think they're just going to see this rapid change. It's fascinating.
And just maybe back in the cloud, there was some severe, well, big price increases with AWS and the whole industry. Have you seen the elasticity kicked in from those price decreases? And are enterprises really now saying, well, this is now cheap enough, it's ridiculous not to do it, outsource it to
Oh, yes, absolutely. So yes, there's definitely price elasticity of demand. The trick is that you have to have very well thought out architecture and supply so that you can achieve, you know, so that you can get to that price point to see the demand. And think about how, you know, you're scaling. It doesn't all show up day one. But I think part of it starts to think about, like, well, there's asset builds and things that we as an industry do that behave that way. Like, we put fiber in the sea. Like, we do things that we put, you know, we buy spectrum. Like, so it's, I think there's the hyperscale three are now sort of settling around Amazon, you know, Google and Microsoft. But I think it's a very big market, and unlike, we have a scale point. So, you know, a carrier with our breadth and portfolio has a scale point and has capabilities to go after that business every bit as much as those players, and certainly as much as folks like IBM and HP and others who have their own scale points they're trying to come at. And the trick is, they're not operators, we are. And operators, you're just on a different side of the canyon than a product company already. And I think, you know, we're very excited about where we're positioned. And
because you straddle both sides to a certain degree, could you talk a little bit about what it's done to your network and in terms of enterprise demand for either latency or bandwidth or security?
So I think we're in the beginning of, I think if you ask that question to me in a year and 2 years, we're gonna, you know, we have a network initiative from an NFV SDN standpoint that James Feger will be talking about while he's down here. And we're in the cloud and technology team hyper-focused on like automated VLANs and an automated network experience. As we start to bring those together, we think that you're going to start to see very compelling things. And even today, we're on net. So we see things like, you know, we're able to do a cost point that's very different than other, you know, providers out there in the cloud market. So companies are coming to us naturally saying, I'm moving a lot of stuff around. You know, the network performance changes when you're looking at this compute, but it changes in unexpected ways because different clients will want to move things in different ways. It's hard to predict.
And Doctor, before, and just maybe just step back a little bit. When you talk about the processing power and the data storage of all the genomes and all these iterations, can you compare that to anything like maybe seismic studies in the energy industry or in any other industries that you've looked at where they have any kind of comparable processing or storage requirements?
First, if I could, I'd like to come back to
yeah.
one of the statements Jonathan made about Ray Kurzweil and the singularity. So I have the privilege of teaching at the university that Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis is the founder of the X Prize, co-founded, called Singularity University. And what that university focuses on is all the exponentials across all points of technology. And I really want to amplify what Jonathan said, and that is that we're already beginning to see the startups that are doing the holographic imaging on devices that resemble Google Glass that rely on a full round trip between what's happening right in front of you and is being recorded right in front of you to predictive analytics and to human analytics with a round trip back displaying possible options for what to do next through across the network, into the analytics cloud, back to Google Glass or its future equivalent. And so that kind of demand on latency and capacity is extraordinary, and I can't describe too much more because I'm under non-disclosure, but suffice it to say, those apps are under development today, and they will be on the market within a year or two. So it is really exciting from that perspective. To your question of, is there anything comparable in other industries? It's hard to imagine anything that involves more complexity of data than the human body itself. And we're just beginning to understand the complexity of the genome. It turns out that there's not just one language of base pairs, that there's two meta languages that sit on top of it. The interaction of the genome with the ecosystem, the microbiome in our gut and our skin across our body, the interaction of that with our immune system, which in itself is amazingly complex, the interaction of that with our brain and brain development. And if you look at the complexity of all those huge data sets, it's really hard to imagine any other industry that would have such a volume and diversity of data that is relevant to what we need to understand to advance the cause of health and wellness.
And maybe just real quick, do you use AWS's website for the processing and storage, or someone else?
And we do both internal and external cloud, but because we're a highly regulated industry, because of the privacy issues, it's only recently that HIPAA certified, HIPAA compliant, that's the healthcare regulation around privacy, have become available to us. And so the commercial cloud services are just beginning to get into the level of security that qualifies for certification and the regulatory constraints that we live within.
And Mark, maybe just to wrap up, can you talk about maybe the evolution of how you see the wireless networks kind of going to maybe LTE Advanced and 5G? I know you're going to cover this, but just maybe a snapshot.
Yeah, so, of course, LTE Advanced is, from at least from a standards perspective, is hearing now. We're starting to see it being deployed and certain features of it. And I think as you look ahead, the technology is, again, it's going to be how do you not just meet the bandwidth demands, but how do you meet it, at 1,000x increase for the demands that you're hearing people talk about for bandwidth. So it is, the microcells, the millimeter wave, massive antennas, MIMOs. It's all the different technologies that we've got to put together and put it together so that, the way we interact with it and can meet the demands is I think, a whole different user experience.
What kind of speeds do you think we'll get with LTE Advanced and maybe with 5G from a real practical user experience?
Well, with LTE Advanced, I think, you can look at, if you look at individual users, I mean, we've demonstrated, gigabit speeds in our labs and in some of our demos. Just recently at one of our commercial deployments right now, I've seen 75 megabit, but that's a single user. As we look into 5G and beyond, I think we're looking at the gigabit speeds with multiple users, many users within a sector. So, under a loaded condition, we're going to be needing to support those types of speeds, I think.
Well, I'd like to thank the panelists so much, and they'll be on other panels. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Enjoy the conference. Grant?